Get on your knees and apologize to everyone, Jasper commanded, his voice cutting through the sudden silence of the open workspace. His finger jabbed toward the center of the room where all 47 of my colleagues could witness my public execution. My throat constricted as I realized what was happening. The gleam in his eyes told me everything. This wasn't discipline. This was entertainment. Now, he insisted, louder this time. My question about cutting mental health resources while approving new executive offices had clearly touched a nerve. The room temperature seemed to plummet as everyone froze. Some stared intently at invisible tasks on their monitors. Others became suddenly fascinated with the ceiling tiles. My heels clicked against the hard floor as I moved to the center of the workspace. Every step felt like walking through cement. The weight of 47 pairs of eyes pressed against my skin like tiny needles. This is what happens when you question decisions above your pay grade, Jasper announced to the room. He adjusted his tie, savoring the moment. When you think you know better than management. I lowered myself slowly to the ground. The rough industrial carpet scraped against my knees through my thin dress pants. I could see the dust particles in the air, dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. The humiliation burned through my chest like hot coals. I lifted my gaze, scanning the faces of my colleagues. Ayla from accounting bit her lip and looked away. Devin from marketing studied his shoes with intense concentration. Owen, who had always been kind to me, stared straight ahead, his expression carefully blank. As I drew breath to speak, a woman stood up from the back corner of the room, Meredith from legal. She stepped forward, her head tilted slightly. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She moved closer, studying my face. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. "Aren't you?" She stopped herself, but the damage was done. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Jasper's head snapped toward Meredith. "Is there a problem?" "No, Meredith hesitated, then took a step back. "Nothing. My mistake." But something had shifted. Jasper noticed it too. His hand trembled slightly as he reached to straighten his already perfect tie again. "What's happening here?" he demanded, his confidence wavering for the first time. I met his gaze and held it. The satisfaction I'd seen there moments ago was replaced with uncertainty. "You wanted me to apologize," I said, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. "Isn't that what this is about?" His eyes darted to Meredith, then back to me. Something was changing, and he could feel it slipping away from him. I slowly rose to my feet. "This meeting is over," I said quietly. "Everyone except executive leadership, please step out." The confusion in the room was palpable. Nobody moved. "Now," I added, with a certainty in my voice that surprised even me. People began gathering their things, exchanging confused glances. As they filed out, Jasper's authority visibly crumbled before my eyes. "Who do you think?" he started. "The person who will determine your future," I answered simply. "Hey there. If you're enjoying this wild ride so far, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, what happens next will make your jaw drop. Leave a comment about the worst boss you've ever had. I guarantee mine might top the list. Let's continue. My name is Bryn. 6 months ago, my life changed completely when my grandmother passed away. She wasn't just any grandmother. She was Eleanor, a legend in private investment circles, though few knew her face. She operated in the shadows, building wealth quietly and effectively. Her will contained an unusual stipulation. Before deciding what to do with her substantial holdings in the company where Jasper worked, I needed to experience its true culture from the bottom up. Using my mother's maiden name, I secured an entry-level position in the marketing department. What I witnessed during those 6 months stunned me. A culture of fear cultivated by middle management, with Jasper as its master architect. He crushed creativity, took credit for innovations that weren't his, and publicly demolished anyone who dared question his methods. I watched brilliant minds leave, taking their potential elsewhere. I saw decisions made through intimidation rather than intelligence. The company was hemorrhaging talent and opportunities because people were afraid to speak up. When I challenged Jasper's benefit cuts with research showing the competitive disadvantage it created, he seized the opportunity for a public execution, creating the perfect demonstration of everything wrong with the leadership structure. Meredith from legal had recognized me from the private succession meetings last month. My disguise, which consisted mostly of different hairstyle, glasses, and wardrobe choices, was unraveling at the worst possible moment, or perhaps the perfect one. The executive team arrived within minutes after my announcement. 7 men and 2 women in tailored suits filed into the conference room where Jasper and I waited. Their expressions ranged from annoyed to puzzled. "What's the meaning of this interruption?" asked Xavier, the CEO, glancing at his watch. "I think we should all sit down," I said, removing my glasses and pulling my hair from its tight bun. "I have something important to share." Jasper stood with his arms crossed, attempting to regain control. "This employee has been insubordinate and—" "This employee is Eleanor Harlow's granddaughter," Meredith interjected from the doorway. Bryn Harlow. Bryn Harlow." The room went still. Eleanor's name carried weight. Her investments had helped build this company from the ground up. Xavier's expression shifted immediately. "Miss Harlow, we weren't aware you were working here for the past 6 months. That was intentional," I said. "My grandmother believed that true understanding comes only through experience. She wanted me to know this company from the inside before making decisions about her 31% controlling interest." Jasper's face drained of color. "Controlling interest?" "Yes," I said, turning to him. "The same controlling interest that will now determine your future here." The next hour consisted of me recounting my 6 months in their trenches. The leadership team listened in growing alarm as I detailed specific instances of toxic management, intimidation tactics, and the resulting talent drain. "I've calculated its cost in innovation, talent, and market position," I explained. "This ends today." Jasper attempted to justify himself, claiming his methods achieved results, but his explanations withered against my firsthand experience. The leadership team sat silently, understanding that their largest individual shareholder had personally endured workplace abuse under their watch. "So what happens now?" Xavier asked, his usual confidence noticeably absent. "Now we make changes," I said, "significant ones." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Xavier and the board agreed to my terms. They had little choice. A complete leadership restructuring began, starting with a thorough investigation into management practices. Jasper wasn't fired immediately. That would have been too easy, too clean. Instead, he was assigned to a special project, documenting and analyzing the company's management failures over the past 3 years. Every toxic decision, every talented employee who left, every innovation opportunity missed due to fear-based leadership, all of it compiled into a comprehensive report. He worked under my direct supervision, forced to confront the damage he'd done. His office was relocated to a small space next to mine, where I could monitor his progress. His authority was stripped away completely. "This is ridiculous," he muttered on his 3rd day, pushing away from his desk. "You can't seriously expect me to write my own professional obituary." I looked up from my work. "Not an obituary, a case study, one that will be presented to the entire company as a learning tool." "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low. "Getting your revenge." "This isn't revenge, Jasper. It's accountability." But he was right about one thing. Part of me did enjoy watching him squirm. After months of witnessing his cruelty, there was satisfaction in seeing the tables turned. I wasn't proud of that feeling, but I didn't deny it either. The transformation wasn't immediate. Change rarely is. Some managers resisted the new direction, clinging to old habits. Others embraced it too enthusiastically, overcompensating with forced positivity that rang hollow. Elise, a brilliant product designer whose ideas Jasper had repeatedly shut down, became my unlikely ally. She approached me 2 weeks after the revelation, hesitantly knocking on my open door. "Can I speak with you?" she asked. I waved her in. "Of course." She sat, fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater. "People are talking. They're saying this is just another corporate reinvention that will fade away once the excitement dies down." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think." She paused, gathering courage. "I think they might be right unless we address the deeper issues." That conversation led to the creation of an innovation council made up of employees from all levels. Their first task, identify the invisible barriers that prevented people from speaking up. Meanwhile, Jasper's report took shape. Each day, he grew quieter, more withdrawn. The data didn't lie. The company had lost 17 top performers in the past year alone. Innovation initiatives had dropped by 60%. Customer satisfaction scores had steadily declined. "I didn't see it," he admitted one evening, standing in my doorway. The office was nearly empty, most people having gone home hours ago. I was so focused on short-term metrics that I missed the bigger picture. I studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine insight or just another manipulation. And now, Now I see it clearly, too clearly. He placed a thumb drive on my desk. It's all here. Every mistake, every missed opportunity, every person I hurt. I took the thumb drive without opening it. I'll review this tonight. He lingered in the doorway. What happens next? With me, I mean. That depends on what's on here, I said, pocketing the drive, and whether I believe you've actually learned anything. After Jasper left, I stayed in the office until midnight, reviewing his work. The document was thorough, surprisingly so. He had named names, detailed incidents, and even included his own internal communications that revealed the toxic culture he'd fostered. If this was an attempt to save his career, it was an unusual approach. What struck me most was the section about me. He documented our interactions in painful detail, including the humiliation ritual that had backfired so spectacularly. Reading his account felt like watching myself through a distorted mirror, the version of me he'd seen versus who I actually was. I targeted her specifically, he'd written, because she reminded me of someone who had threatened my position years ago. I realize now this pattern has repeated throughout my career. The revelation wasn't entirely surprising. Bullies often acted from insecurity, but seeing it laid bare was unexpected. I closed the document and stared out the window at the city lights. My grandmother's voice seemed to echo in my head. Power used as a weapon destroys twice, its target and its wielder. 2 days later, I called Jasper into a meeting with the executive team. He entered the boardroom with the defeated posture of a man expecting execution. "We've reviewed your report," I began. "It's comprehensive." Xavier nodded stiffly. "More comprehensive than we expected." Jasper's hands were steady now as he sat across from us. The trembling uncertainty from that day on the office floor had been replaced by a resigned calm. "What happens now?" he asked, echoing his question from days before. I slid a folder across the table. "You have 2 options." He opened it slowly. Inside were 2 documents, a resignation letter with a generous severance package, and a contract for a new position. "Organizational culture specialist," he read aloud, confusion evident in his voice. "I don't understand." "Nobody knows toxic leadership better than someone who perfected it," I explained. "Option 1, you take the severance and walk away. Option 2, you help us fix what you broke." His eyes narrowed. "This is some kind of extended punishment, isn't it? Keep your enemies closer?" "This isn't about enemies," I said. "It's about expertise. You spent years creating a culture of fear. Now you can spend years dismantling it, if you're willing to do the work." He stared at the contract, saying nothing. "Think about it," I said, standing. "Let me know by tomorrow." As I walked out, I could feel the eyes of the executive team following me. They were still adjusting to the new power dynamics, still trying to determine if I was an ally or a threat. The truth was, I wasn't entirely sure myself. That night, I called my mother for our weekly check-in. "How's the grand experiment going?" she asked, her voice tinged with the familiar mix of concern and amusement. I sighed, sinking deeper into my couch. "Complicated." I offered Jasper a choice today. "The man who made you kneel?" Her tone sharpened. "Why would you offer him anything? Because firing him would be easy. Making him part of the solution is harder, for both of us." "You sound like your grandmother," she said after a pause. "She always believed people could change if given the right incentive." "So, did they?" I asked. "In her experience? Sometimes, not always." She sighed. "Just be careful, Bryn. Corporate transformation is like turning an ocean liner, slow and full of resistance. And some people will never forgive you for changing the status quo." Her warning stayed with me through the restless night that followed. The next morning, I arrived early to find Jasper already waiting outside my office. The signed contract was in his hand. "I'm choosing option 2, he said without preamble. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. "Why?" "Because leaving would be easier." He met my gaze directly. "And because I've spent my career taking the easy route, bullying instead of leading, intimidating instead of inspiring." It was a good answer, perhaps too good. "The first sign that you're not genuine about this, you're out," I warned. "No second chances." He nodded once. "Understood. Understood." As the weeks passed, the company began its slow transformation. We established new management training programs, revised performance metrics to value collaboration, and created anonymous reporting channels for toxic behavior. Jasper, surprisingly, threw himself into his new role. He worked with department heads to identify problem areas, conducted workshops on recognizing intimidation tactics, and seemed genuinely committed to change. But not everyone was convinced. "He's playing you," Elise insisted during one of our regular meetings. "I've watched him for years. He adapts to survive. Right now, survival means becoming the poster child for redemption." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "Or maybe he's actually changing." "People like Jasper don't change," she countered. "They just find new ways to get what they want." Her words echoed my own doubts. Every time I saw Jasper successfully leading a workshop or mentoring junior staff, I questioned whether it was authentic growth or elaborate theater. The real test came 3 months into the transformation. I was in a quarterly review meeting with the board when my assistant interrupted with an urgent message. A group of employees had gathered in the main conference room, demanding to speak with leadership about the changes. "It's not good," she whispered. "They're saying the new systems are just surveillance by another name." Xavier looked alarmed. "We should shut this down immediately." "No," I said, standing. "We should listen." When I entered the conference room, 30 employees fell silent. Their expressions ranged from angry to anxious. At the front of the room stood Devin from marketing, the same man who had studied his shoes so intently during my humiliation. "Miss Harlow," he said, his voice steadier than I expected, "we appreciate the changes you've been trying to make, but there's a problem." "I'm listening," I said, taking a seat at the back of the room rather than the head of the table. "The anonymous reporting system," he continued. "It's not anonymous. Multiple people have faced subtle retaliation after filing reports." My heart sank. What kind of retaliation? Scheduling changes, unexpected project reassignments, nothing obvious enough to trigger alarms, but the pattern is clear. Before I could respond, the door opened and Jasper walked in. The tension in the room immediately thickened. "What's going on?" he asked, scanning the faces. Devin hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "We're discussing the reporting system issues." I watched Jasper carefully, waiting for his reaction. This was the moment of truth. Would he defend the system or listen to the criticism? He looked around the room, then took a deep breath. "You're right. The system has flaws, significant ones." A murmur spread through the gathered employees. "I know because I've been tracking the reports," he continued, "and I've noticed patterns in how they're handled. I was gathering data before bringing it forward." He pulled out his tablet and displayed a series of charts on the main screen. They showed clear correlations between reports and subtle personnel actions. "The system was designed to be anonymous," he explained, "but it wasn't implemented correctly. The third-party vendor we're using has security vulnerabilities that allow certain administrators to identify reporters." I studied him, trying to determine if this was another carefully crafted performance. His data seemed legitimate, but something felt off. "How did you discover this?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "I was conducting a security review as part of my new role. It's all documented in my weekly reports." The explanation made sense, yet doubt lingered. Had he known about this vulnerability all along? Was he presenting himself as the solution to a problem he'd helped create? "Thank you for bringing this forward," I said to the group. "We'll address it immediately. The reporting system will be suspended until we can guarantee true anonymity." As the meeting disbanded, I caught Elise watching Jasper with the same suspicion I felt. Our eyes met briefly across the room, a silent communication passing between us. Later that afternoon, she appeared at my office door. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "About Jasper." She placed a flash drive on my desk, different from the one Jasper had given me months earlier. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," she replied. "I've been keeping my own records." I plugged in the drive and opened the files. What I saw made my blood run cold. Emails between Jasper and Xavier, dating back weeks before my revelation. Strategic planning about how to handle the Harlow situation. Discussions about keeping me contained. And most damning of all, a message from just 2 days ago. Everything proceeding as discussed. She believes the transformation is genuine. When the time comes to present to the board, we'll have everything we need to demonstrate why her approach is failing. Patience is key here. I looked up at Elise, stunned. "How did you get these?" "I used to work in IT before transferring to product design," she said simply, "and I've learned to be very careful about who I trust." I leaned back in my chair, the implications washing over me. Jasper hadn't changed. He'd simply adapted his strategy. And worse, he wasn't working alone. "What are you going to do?" Elise asked. I stared at the evidence before me. my mind racing through possibilities. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week, the perfect opportunity for Jasper and Xavier to make their move. Let them think they're winning, I said slowly, a plan forming in my mind. For now. That's risky, she warned. They're already undermining the changes you've made. Yes, I agreed. But they've made one critical mistake. What's that? I closed the laptop, a cold resolve settling over me. They still think I'm playing by their rules. The next 5 days were a careful dance. I maintained the appearance of oblivious leadership while quietly setting my own pieces in motion. Each morning, I met with Jasper to discuss progress, watching him perform the role of reformed tyrant with increasing confidence. The culture workshop yesterday went exceptionally well, he reported, sliding a participant feedback form across my desk. People are beginning to trust the process. I scanned the document, noting the suspiciously positive responses. Impressive. Any resistance? Nothing significant. A few skeptics, but they'll come around. I nodded, matching his self-assurance with my own performance. The board presentation is coming together nicely. I'm looking forward to sharing our progress. His eyes flickered briefly, a micro-expression of satisfaction. I've prepared some compelling metrics that demonstrate the impact of our changes. Wonderful, I said, smiling. I'm counting on you to help make this case. As soon as he left, I turned to my computer and continued my parallel work. For every official meeting on my calendar, I scheduled a shadow meeting. For every report I shared with Xavier and the executive team, I prepared a second, more detailed version. Elise had become my most trusted ally, along with Ayla from accounting and 3 others who had reached out after the conference room confrontation. We worked after hours, gathering information and building our case. These financial records are concerning, Ayla whispered during one of our late-night sessions. Her finger traced a pattern of transactions that ordinary review would miss. Look at these executive bonus structures compared to the cost-cutting measures imposed on staff. I studied the numbers, feeling a chill as I recognized the pattern. They've been systematically stripping resources from productive departments to inflate executive compensation for at least 3 years, she confirmed. The mental health program cuts were just the latest example. Can you document all of this for the board presentation? She nodded, her expression grim. Already working on it. Meanwhile, Meredith from legal had been conducting her own investigation into the company's governance practices. She'd approached me privately after our first confrontation with Jasper. I recognized you that day because I'd reviewed your grandmother's estate documents, she explained. I never imagined you'd be working incognito on the marketing floor. Did you tell anyone else? No, but I've had concerns about leadership practices for months. I just never had the standing to address them. Now she sat across from me, reviewing our strategy for the board meeting. What you're proposing is aggressive, she cautioned. The board won't appreciate being blindsided. They've been blindsided by executive misconduct for years, I countered. They just didn't know it. She tapped her pen against her notepad. Xavier has 3 loyal board members who will fight you on this. You'll need to neutralize them first. I'm counting on it, I said. The night before the board presentation, I received a text from Jasper. Final review of materials tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, knowing exactly what this review would entail. He and Xavier would make their move then, attempting to control the narrative before we reached the boardroom. Sleep evaded me that night. I paced my apartment, rehearsing responses to every possible scenario. My grandmother had taught me that business was like chess. You had to see 5 moves ahead, while making your opponent believe you were only seeing one. Never show your full hand, she'd advised. Let them think they know your limits. By morning, dark circles shadowed my eyes, but my resolve was ironclad. I arrived at the office at 6:45 a.m., finding Xavier and Jasper already waiting in the conference room. A stack of presentation materials sat before them. Bryn, good morning, Xavier greeted, his tone overly cordial. We thought we'd help finalize the presentation materials. I glanced at the stack, then at their expectant faces. That's thoughtful. What changes did you make? Jasper slid a revised executive summary toward me. Just some minor adjustments to better reflect our progress. The board responds better to certain framing. I skimmed the document, noting how they'd systematically undermined every substantial change I'd implemented. The transformation had been reframed as a refinement of existing practices. My role had been minimized to that of a well-meaning but inexperienced observer. Interesting perspective, I said mildly. very different from what I experienced kneeling on the office floor. Jasper flinched almost imperceptibly. That unfortunate incident, Xavier interjected smoothly, was clearly a misunderstanding. We've addressed it internally. Have we? I asked, meeting his gaze directly. Of course. And now we need to focus on moving forward productively. Xavier tapped the presentation materials. These revisions will help prevent unnecessary board concerns. I nodded slowly, as if considering. I see your point. Relief flickered across their faces. However, I continued, I've prepared my own materials. I removed my laptop from my bag and opened it. I think the board deserves the complete picture. Jasper's posture stiffened. We agreed on a unified approach. Did we? I turned the screen toward them, displaying a presentation vastly different from their sanitized version. I don't recall that agreement. Xavier leaned forward, scanning the content with growing alarm. This is completely inappropriate. You can't present this. Actually, I can. And I will. I closed the laptop. The board meeting starts in 2 hours. I suggest you prepare yourselves. As I stood to leave, Jasper caught my arm. His grip was tight enough to hint at desperation, without leaving marks. You don't understand what you're doing, he hissed. This approach will damage the company and your inheritance, said. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. I understand exactly what I'm doing. For the first time in years, this company will hear the truth. The boardroom was uncomfortably warm despite the aggressive air conditioning. 10 board members sat around the polished table, with Xavier at the head. Jasper had positioned himself near the presentation screen, clearly planning to intercept any problematic slides. I took my seat quietly, nodding to the board members I'd spoken with privately over the past few days. Meredith sat in the corner, ostensibly as legal counsel but actually as my witness. Let's begin, Xavier announced, his voice carrying forced confidence. We're here to discuss the organizational changes implemented since Miss Harlow joined us 3 months ago. He launched into a preamble about balancing innovation with proven approaches, setting the stage for the narrative he and Jasper had constructed. I waited, letting him build his case. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. Before I share my findings, I want to thank you all for welcoming me into this company, most of you unknowingly, as I worked to understand its true culture. I advanced to my first slide, bypassing the materials Xavier had prepared entirely. The screen displayed a simple timeline of events, beginning with my arrival 6 months earlier. What you're about to see is the unfiltered reality of how this company operates, not the version presented in quarterly reports or executive summaries, but the daily experience of the people who make this company function. Xavier cleared his throat. Perhaps we should follow the agreed agenda. There was no agreement, I interrupted calmly, and that's part of the problem I'm addressing today. For the next 40 minutes, I presented evidence of systematic mismanagement, toxic leadership practices, and financial misconduct. The board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to concern to outright alarm. When I reached the section detailing Jasper's public humiliation ritual and the subsequent conspiracy to undermine my authority, the room went completely still. This isn't an isolated incident, I explained. This is a pattern of behavior that has cost this company millions in lost talent, missed opportunities, and legal exposure. One of Xavier's loyal board members, a gray-haired man named Harris, leaned forward. These are serious allegations, Miss Harlow, but they remain just that, allegations. Actually, I replied, they're documented facts. I nodded to Meredith, who distributed sealed folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find copies of internal communications, financial records, and sworn statements from current and former employees. You'll also find a preliminary legal analysis of the company's exposure under current leadership. Xavier's face had gone pale. This is an ambush. No, I corrected him. This is governance. As the board members reviewed the materials, I continued my presentation, methodically dismantling the facade that Xavier and Jasper had maintained for years. Jasper remained surprisingly silent, his eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When I finished, he stood abruptly. May I address the board? He asked, his voice steadier than I expected. Xavier shot him a warning glance, but the board chair nodded permission. Jasper moved to the front of the room, standing beside me rather than opposite. He took a deep breath. Everything Bryn has presented is true, he said simply. A murmur ran through the room. I was brought into this company 5 years ago with a mandate to toughen up the culture. What began as performance improvement became something toxic. I perpetuated it, I refined it, and I was rewarded for it. He turned to face me directly. What you witnessed on your knees that day wasn't an aberration. It was our culture, distilled to its essence. I knew exactly what I was doing. Xavier stood, his chair scraping loudly. This is absurd. Jasper, you're speaking out of turn. I'm speaking the truth, Jasper replied, not taking his eyes off me. For once, he reached into his jacket and removed a small drive. This contains my personal records of every directive I received, every performance evaluation that praised my methods, and every executive decision that reinforced the culture we created. He placed it on the table. I prepared it the night before you offered me the choice to stay or go. I chose to stay because I thought I could manipulate the situation. I was wrong. I studied his face, searching for deception but finding only resignation. Why are you doing this now? I asked quietly. A sad smile touched his lips. Because watching you fight for 3 months made me remember something I lost years ago. The reason I wanted to lead in the first place. He turned to the board. I recommend you accept every change Bryn has proposed, replace the current executive leadership, including me, and allow her to rebuild what we destroyed. With that, he walked out of the boardroom, leaving stunned silence in his wake. The board chair finally broke the silence. I think we need to call an emergency executive session. Miss Harlow, would you excuse us? I gathered my materials. Of course. You have my contact information when you're ready to discuss next steps. As I walked out, I felt lighter than I had in months. Whatever the board decided, the truth was finally in the open. Outside, I found Jasper waiting by the elevators. Was that real? I asked. Or just another performance? He considered the question carefully. Does it matter? The result is the same. It matters to me. He nodded slowly. It was real. Too late to matter, probably, but real. The elevator arrived, and he stepped inside. Before the doors closed, he met my eyes one last time. The thing about power, he said quietly, is that it reveals who you truly are. You used yours to fix something. I used mine to break people. That's the difference between us. As the doors slid shut, I realized that my revenge wasn't in destroying Jasper or Xavier. It was in reclaiming the company my grandmother had helped build, restoring its soul one day at a time. 3 weeks later, the transformation began in earnest. With a new executive team and board oversight, we rebuilt from the ground up. The day I visited that same floor where I'd once knelt in humiliation, I found a different energy, people contributing ideas freely, projects moving forward without fear. My revenge wasn't in ruining careers. It was in creating something better than what had been taken away, something my grandmother would have been proud of. Thanks for sticking with this wild ride to the end. If you've ever dealt with toxic leadership, drop a comment below and share your experience. Did Jasper's redemption surprise you? Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about workplace justice and transformation. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something they could never imagine.